Humanities. And I think we have really great 4 panelists today for discussion about this topic. I will try to be, just a moderator. I'm not going to talk about my personal opinions, attitudes, and so on. I will just read the questions. I will try also to moderate the Q&A box where the attendees could comment on some questions which will rise here in the panel, and to see whether some of you raise the hand to allow you to give you the speaking rights and to allow you to say your opinion about some topic. So I would like to encourage, of course, all attendees to raise the hand if you have something interesting to say about some topic. So generally speaking, I said that the topic of this panel session is absolutely the same as the topic of the conference. So today we are going to discuss about the usage of ICT tools in social science and humanities. As I said, I think in the introductory speaking while I opening the conference, the SSH researchers should be, of course, aware of existence of a lot of ICT tools which can be used and which can be useful for them to perform some research and to collaborate, to disseminate the results and so on. And these tools, of course, could change the way how SSH researchers carry out research, collaborate, disseminate, and evaluate research outputs. I'm not sure whether today in the science we made that cultural change or shift in our minds. I'm talking now as a researcher. And for instance, in travel, I mentioned, I think yesterday, we have today TripAdvisor and some other tools, and people are completely changed their minds and shift in minds, made that shift in minds, meaning that today we are not using a travel agency when we want to organize some holiday. We are using TripAdvisor, Airbnb, and some other tools. I'm not sure whether it's the similar situation in research. We are using the computers, of course, but I'm not sure whether we are using all available tools and digital ways to make better results in our everyday life. So our first speaker today, first panelist, is Daniela Duca. You can see her now. Daniela works in the innovation team at Sage Publishing. She explores how new technologies are changing the way social scientists are doing research while incubating or finding and promoting software tools in space. In her latest white paper, she reviewed more than, I think she corrected me yesterday, 500 software tools, packages, and applications used by social scientists, who develops and funds them, what makes them successful, and what is the future of technologies for social sciences. The second one panelist is Miloš Jovanović. Miloš is currently the head of unit of the group Tools and Methods at the Fraunhofer Institute for Technological Trend Analysis in Euskirchen, Germany. His group works on developing and scanning for new IT tools and methods that can be employed for the scientific work at their institute. His research focuses on bibliometrics, patentometrics, and recently altmetrics and the visualization of data. He also worked in some FP7 and Horizon projects as a project coordinator and work package leader. He studied modern history, politics, media science and information science at the Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf, and finished his PhD working on a scientometric method to classify technologies into basic or applied science. Thank you, Miloš, for accepting also to be with us today. The third one panelist will be Susanna Dumoschel, a PhD in French literature, who is a researcher and engineer at the CNRS. She works in the Humanum unit at an infrastructure for digital humanities. She leads the European project Triple. She's a coordinator of the European infrastructure Operas, in charge of strategic partnerships dedicated to open access scholarly communication in the field of social science and humanities. In addition, she's involved in the setting up of the IOSC by participating in various working groups and by developing services to integrate the IOSC catalog. Thank you, Susanna, also for joining us today. She is strongly committed to the open science movement and to the promotion of research in social science and humanities. She is particularly active in the field of research infrastructures. She is interested, among others, in innovative technologies such as the blockchain, in questions and issues related to citizen science, or in the epistemology of digital humanities. So thank you, Suzanne, for joining us today. And the last one, but not at least important, of course, is a Professor Ulf Dietrich Reibs. He is a professor at the University of Constance and also one of the founder of eScience. He's a full professor in the Faculty of Sciences at the University of Constance, where he holds the chair of Psychological Methods Assessment and eScience, iScience. For more than 2 decades, he has been working on internet-based research methodologies, the psychology of the internet, measurement, privacy, social media, and big data. And I think he's one of the who actually for the first time mentioned that term, internet-based research methodologies, in the literature. Ulf and his team develop and provide free web tools for researchers, teachers, students, and the public. They received numerous awards for their web applications and methodological work serving the research community. In 1996, Ulf won in the first internet literature competition in Germany, co-organized by the German weekly Die Zeit and IBM with his digital poem, Das Webtonet. In his spare time, Ulf enjoys family life with wife, daughter, and their 2 cats in Switzerland, swimming, catamaran sailing, soccer, and playing the French game of bowls. Thank you very much, Ulf, for accepting to be a part of this panel. There is not that information, but I think that Ulf lived in more than 7 countries or something like that in his life. So he traveled a lot in his life.
Yeah, you skipped one slide. That's why that was on there.
Okay, sorry for that. Okay, I'm not sure. Would you like to say a few more words about yourself, or we should start now with the topics and start to discuss first? Of course, we are going to discuss about 5 topics, let's say, as you can see on this slide. And now we are going, general rules of this panel session is the following one. So when I read the details and the questions in one impact, it will be appeared also in the Q&A box. All attendees can comment the questions or like questions. And of course, panelists are going to be unmuted and to say a few words about that topic. Moreover, it's possible also that someone from the audience raise a hand and to give them her or him rights to speak. So the first today topic is the impact of the development of ICT. So what effect has the development of information communication technologies, and especially the internet, made on the social science and humanities and the research in these fields in the last couple of years? As some additional literature, you can use the Ulf paper, which you can find on this slide. Okay, let's start maybe with Daniela, because I first introduced her. Daniela, can you briefly say a few words about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dragan. And it's a pleasure to be here with such a great group of people discussing this topic. I come more from a perspective of looking at what researchers are doing and looking at the tools that they're using. And while I was reviewing this variety of tools, and you're correct, for the white paper, we did look at 400. It's just since then, more have come up. So we've got almost 520 tools now that we've looked at. And so really just based on this and interacting and discussing, chatting with academics, what I've seen happening and the impact that I've seen from ICT on research is threefold. So I think there's been a big impact on collaboration. For example, I was speaking with this researcher, James, who before, he's a sociologist by training. So before he used to work on on his research, publish alone some academic papers, and then he was using tools like tools for qualitative analysis. So unknowingly, he was collecting loads of data, and he had almost 5,000 documents. He loaded them on one of these tools. It crashed, so he essentially had to learn Python. And once he did that, everyone wanted to collaborate with him, and since then he's only writing papers with other people. So I think that has had a big impact. Second, I think is speed. So but speed in quite small areas. For example, a lot of social science researchers, they are doing interviews, right? Running interviews. And so normally what would happen is they would either transcribe those interviews themselves or work with their graduate students to do that, or hire some freelance transcribers. What has happened with, say, technologies like speech-to-text that have improved over the past 10 years is that it sped up that little process, and it made it a little bit cheaper. So that's another way. But at the same time, as this is coming up, what people are, or what academics are seeing is actually, well, do we actually need that transcription? So they're thinking, well, maybe we can just need to summarize to hear or to remember what the person has said in that interview. So essentially the way our, I guess, memory works. So that leads me to the last point, which is new methods and new data. So with the internet up and everybody being on the internet, well, not everybody, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of data both on the internet that can be used to analyze social behaviors, how we're impacting the development of technologies and all of that. But also there are new technologies that let people study things that haven't been possible before. And here I'll give a brief example. There's this academic, Mel Slater. He's looking at so he's working with VR, so with virtual reality technologies, and he's running experiments that wouldn't be possible to do in real life. For example, he was looking at the impact of death on behavior. And obviously you can't make someone die in real life and then see how if they take life more seriously, but you can do that in VR. And so, yeah, so to summarize, I think the impact has been great, and it's mostly around collaboration, speed, and new methods.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Milos, can you maybe add some on top of this, or let's say talk about your attitude about this topic?
Yes, hi Dragane. Thank you very much also from my side for inviting me, and just a short thing that maybe illustrates the improvements that ICT has had for a long time, I guess, on our field. Dragan and I have been collaborating for a couple of years now, but we actually never talked to each other yet. We just collaborated via email and via writing papers together. And this is the first time I'm actually having an interactive discussion with him. So that maybe makes an interesting point. I would like to add something to what Daniela just said. I think I would underwrite everything that she just said. When I wrote down my notes for the panel discussion, I had some very similar ideas there, but maybe I can add some other aspects to what Daniela said. I liked very much, Daniela, what you said about this guy who had to learn Python before people actually started talking to him, to make it a bit more pointed there. I think that's the chance, and it's also the problem that we are having with ICT in the social sciences and humanities. My background is originally from the humanities, but I've been working for almost 15 years now at a Fraunhofer Institute, which is an institute of applied science. So mostly we have natural scientists here and engineers. So I'm something of an exotic person here, which is interesting for me because it is true. People are talking different languages here, and I don't mean English and German, for example. So I also see the supporting role of ICT in social sciences and humanities, what has already been said. So we have greater data crunching capabilities. We can work with data sets that are bigger than ever before. building on that, we can use visualization techniques, which have improved very, very much. And it's great for presentations and getting across our point. Similar as the Python thing that we just heard, that's a chance and it's also a risk. And it's my impression, my personal impression, which is only a small part of the whole social science and humanities, of course, is that the great chances sometimes overshadow the fundamentals, and that is the question of interpreting the data, data interpretation, and expert knowledge. That hasn't changed in the last decades, or I hope will never change. You still need that. You need these fundamentals. So it's good that you know Python, but of course you need to know your subject in order to be able to use Python as a supporting tool. What I would also stress is this whole thing with new data and new perspectives that we can add to the lot. But again, here, it's a very boring argument from my point. The fundamentals stay important. I will never forget my professor when I started history studies. He said, it's all great with the internet and digitalization and everything, but you have to read a lot. That hasn't changed, and I personally don't think it's going to change if we take the whole artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning aspects into our work. They are great supporting tools, but we still have to stay experts in our fields to be able to interpret the data and interpret these great and fancy visualizations that thankfully are possible now.
Okay, Milos, thank you very much. Now, Susanne, it's your turn to comment this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Dragan. Thank you as well. I'm very pleased to be here and to participate to this this panel. So I think already a lot has been said actually by Daniela and Milos, and I just can say that of course I totally agree with what they both said. Maybe I can just yeah, just would like to add two points. One about the positive impact, and maybe to raise a short issue, a small issue, maybe a less positive impact. So the first one, the positive one, is that it has transformed the SSH research in the terms that, in the sense that it's more project oriented, maybe a more operational research than the one we have previously, and maybe more impact oriented. So I think this is really important, especially in the field of SSH, which is quite often less seen as real research or real, yes, with less impact in the society. So I think thanks to ICT tools, we can highlight the impact of SSH research. But on the contrary, this raises a kind of issue in the sense that for me, research, SSH research especially, implies a long-term perspective. So it's something which needs to be deployed with maybe at some point the time when researchers need to lose, and I really insist on that word, to lose time in order to have spare time in order to create and to elaborate their project. And maybe because of ICT tools and because of the intensification of exchange and another kind of efficiency, I would say, between the sharing, the knowledge sharing, it can be quite an issue to have something, a good complementarity between the efficiency and the quickness of the ICT tools, of their usage, and the long time of the SSH research. And maybe this is the next step where we can think about that for the upcoming year. But it's only, to raise an issue because everything was said before. Thank you, Dragan.
Thank you very much. Wolf, do you have maybe something to add on this topic, which is not already mentioned?
Yeah, first, hello everybody, and thanks Dragan and your team for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Many things have been said that I was also thinking about, and I totally agree with what was said so far. Maybe some additional points are, especially in the behavioral and social sciences, we have wider reach to a wider population, more diverse population through ICTs, through the internet. That really has changed. And also I would like to mention two very specific populations where you only have a few people maybe in a whole country, right? So we do some clinical work, for example, and sometimes have to survey people who have rare diseases, and you wouldn't find enough if you would just do this locally. And via the internet and ICTs, this has become possible. I will post an example in the chat for a paper on something like that. So that's really clearly something we couldn't do before, and that is an advancement. I agree with what was said about speed of research earlier, but also sometimes it goes slower because you have to learn the technologies, right? And then the methods, how to use the technologies. And your participants have to do that too. So sometimes it's also going slower, right? So it's not, I wouldn't say always faster, but where it goes faster, and I think in many of the things we scientists do in our life, there is its own dynamic, because if you're early, you have this advantage, right? But then slowly within a discipline, this expectation comes up, you know, use these tools, be quicker, right? Like in the example earlier with online analysis of texts. And then suddenly there is this expectation that in research, you should do this task very quickly because you have these tools, right? So people who did the same thing 20 years ago, they could say, I need a year for this. And now you're expected to do it in 2 days, right? And if you pick the wrong tool, maybe you can't do it. So there is this dynamic, also these expectations that are created by the new technologies. That's what I wanted to add as a...
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting, yeah. Do we have someone from the audience who would like to raise their hand and to add some new message on this topic, let's say, some new aspect? Okay, then we are going to our next topic. It's about the collaboration. You already mentioned something about the collaboration in the previous topic, of course. And here's the list of the questions which you can discuss. So, do you think ICT tools and infrastructures are widely adopted by SSH researchers? So, do you think ICT specialists are aware of some SSH domain problems in which resolving they can take a part or help? Do we have enough research teams, projects, events, funding grants, which can merge together people coming from these two areas? If no, is the responsible? If no, who is responsible for some of the previous questions? What should be done to change it, and by whom? So the question is, so one approach, of course, is that SSH researchers can learn to use some tool to resolve some everyday research tasks, or of course can collaborate with people from ICT. Here is the question for which task we can collaborate and whether we collaborate enough at the moment. So we are going to change a little bit the order now, and I suggest to start with Suzanne with these questions.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Dragan. Yeah. So I would say no to most of the question, but maybe partially. Of course, not all ICT tools and infrastructure are adopted by SSH researcher, and I can say we are very far from that, even if it's on a good track. The fact here is that it's always quite complicated to speak for the whole SSH, because even in terms of discipline we have a lot of very different kind of usage. For instance, I'm coming from French literature, and I really know that in literature we are still very far from using ICT tools. But if you speak about history or sociology or things like that, or even geography, of course, it's not the same level of appropriation. So this is an ongoing work we still have to do. This is what I can say for the first question. For the second one, I think here again, not totally, of course not, but I feel pretty confident here. It's I mean, we have more and more ICT specialists or SSH engineers who work with the SSH researcher and who are well aware of the problem of SSH. So I think here it's not so we will arrive to something. And do we have enough research team, project, and so on? No, we will never have enough, actually. So we have a lot to do, and so it's. I know it's a quite easy answer that I'm doing, but currently, no, we need to go further on that and to put more effort, especially in the dialogue between ICT specialist and the SSH researcher. And what should be done to change it? So of course, the first word which come in mind is training. The second one is that we can use the project, the funded project. I think each time we launch a project, we have both researcher and ICT, and here I'm speaking as a triple project coordinator. We have in the same consortium researcher and engineers in ICT engineers, and the more funding project we have like that, the better collaboration and knowledge of each competencies we will be able to share. So and maybe as a last point, I would say that I think that for a researcher, especially in SSH, the general aim is not always known. This is more a question which comes into the mind of the researcher. And this is maybe where is the difficulty with the dialogue with the ICT specialist. It's not really, of course, we don't speak always the same language, but it's also a way, the question of the methodology, the how to. So I think for the researcher, it can be quite complicated to explain this is where I want to go, because most of the time he or she doesn't know where he or she, what kind of result he or she expects. So this can be quite complicated for an ICT specialist who is more able to say, okay, this is the issue and this is how we want to solve that. So it can be, I think it's maybe, we don't work in the same perspective. And this is maybe where we can do something to increase the collaboration.
Okay, thank you very much. I really liked your last point, actually. Yeah, I see where is the problem. Yeah, okay. And Ulf, can you add something on this topic?
Yes, yeah, I totally agree, and I think communication is very important, and you need to learn in interdisciplinary work how people from other disciplines and other backgrounds think, and to understand that in collaborations, and that is necessary if you start using ICT tools. At least you need to understand, if you're not a computer scientist, you need to understand to talk to computer scientists or ICT people. And maybe even more if the projects are larger. This is a hurdle for some people, and so I think the answer to the first question is, it is adopted, but to get it widely adopted, it takes communication and it takes understanding, and with many very cool tools, it doesn't really work. Some are successful, but that really needs some communication and a strategy to disseminate. So much from my side.
Milos, it's now your turn for your topic. Sorry, I was muted. I just wanted to say that you're muted and then noticed that you can't hear me. Okay, my apologies.
No
It's
problems.
your turn, Milos.
Thank you very much. Not to repeat what Suzanne and Ulf Dietrich have already said, I would just like to add, I had an interesting discussion with my boss and my former institute director, both physicists here at the institute. The topic was cliometrics. That's a subdiscipline maybe where people try to measure historical data and try to infer some information out of that. And the discussion we had was very typical. I have these kinds of discussions regularly here. It was the question of whether that's possible or not. So the physicists, and I take them as a proxy for ICT people at this point, they very much think, of course, in their discipline, and we do the same in our way. And that's what has been said already, that we maybe speak different languages, but of course there is a common ground. And that's one thing where I would actually say something differently to Suzanne, and that's from my point of view, what I see. Every scientist has this problem, every researcher has this problem, that you don't really know at the beginning of your research what to expect, what's going to happen at the end. Of course, we all know when we write a proposal, we are supposed to do just that, write down exactly what we expect to come up. And in my experience, the same is true for ICT people. But as far as I can tell, ICT tools and infrastructures are, depending on the discipline, as has already been said, not widely adopted by SSH researchers, but there's a spectrum there. What I think is more important is question 2, whether I think that ICT specialists are aware of SSH domain problems. That's, at least in my experience, whenever I see ICT people, hard science people coming together with SSH people, is very often this, oh, okay, that's how it is. That's interesting. It's a slightly different way of how we do it, how our work is. And I think that's a very important thing for every project, for every collaboration, multidisciplinary wise, where you just need to find this common ground, because I think we do all have the same common scientific ground there. We just approach it from different perspectives. And the last question, whether I think that there are enough research teams, projects, and so on, I do think there are a lot of things happening. I also think more things could happen, but I don't think we should just throw money out there and expect people to just collaborate and everything's going to work out fine. Maybe a more systematic approach is not such a bad idea, but also these things are being done with the framework program and similar things. So I am rather optimistic from this point of view, but it seems to me that we are still in a phase where the collaboration is not that widespread yet. And I'm not sure whether that's really going to change. A colleague of mine, to put in a very strong word here, once talked about disciplinary racism in this way. He said that, well, you know, natural scientists have their way of looking at humanities people have their way of looking at engineers, and so on. Just to give you a small example, the PhD in Germany is called the doctor, and if you have an engineering doctor, you have a minus behind that. There are historical reasons for that, but that's one of the jokes people tell in the humanities, saying, yeah, you have a doctor minus, you know, like this is not so good. It's a joke, but as with many things like that, there are, for those people, there is a certain touch to it, a certain taste to it. So yeah, I think there are problems, there are things, ways to improve it, but we'll see. I'm optimistic.
Okay, thank you. It's great that you're optimistic. Yeah? And Danielle, now it's your turn for this topic.
Yes, I am also quite optimistic, and I agree with what has been said so far. I'd say in terms of wide adoption, I think that it's almost following what Milos was saying is quite a perception. I was reading recently a book from a mathematician, Marcus de Soto, and he was talking exactly about the same kind of divide between the mathematicians, which are classic, versus the mathematicians which are kind of embracing ICT and embracing new technology, which is exactly what's happening in the social sciences, in the humanities, and other fields. So it's not, I think it's, if we like sit within a discipline, we kind of have that skewed perception because we don't exactly know whether that's the case in other disciplines. If I look by the number of tools, and again, I'm gonna talk about this, I think is quite widely adopted, and I think that those researchers and academics who do want to use software tools and technologies in the social sciences are doing it. Perhaps not all of them do in fact know about all the different types that could be available or that are already available that could help solve the problems they're trying to attract. And that's probably most likely, in my opinion, an issue of time and time to learn a new tool or to really understand, because many actually, once they learn a new method or a new tool, I think they have enough material for a lifetime to develop or to analyze using that tool. So, you know, that becomes a limiting factor. I think in terms of research teams and projects, I also think there are quite plenty, but that there's also enough space to do more collaboration. One initiative that I really love and I would love to see more is happening in public libraries. They're sort of developing these library labs. So the British Library in the UK spearheaded this, and now there are probably around 10 libraries around the world that have developed these library labs, where they actually dedicate data scientists and computer scientists to work with social scientists, with humanities researchers, to explore the wide collections that the libraries have, and do really interesting projects. And the British Library Labs, they even had awards for super interesting projects to kind of promote that this is something that you can do if you wanted to. So I think that's a brilliant collaboration. They both dedicated time. They are dedicating time and some funding for that. And I think also what we've seen, and I think is a really good indicator, is a growing number of organizations that are coming together to do this type of support infrastructures. So, you know, they have perhaps consortia that are both like ICT specialists, but also specifically created for the social sciences and the humanities researchers. So, I mean, we've seen Odyssey, you know, all the really cool work that Cesc and Dara are doing. There's Pelagius and also some other organizations that are actually funding some of these tools, which is quite cool. I think I do want to talk about one initiative that I thought is really cool, because in terms of collaborations, those are happening, and as Mirj and Suzanne were mentioning, actually, there's that a little bit of a divide, right, between the disciplines, because the computer scientists, the ICT specialists, they sort of have different or slightly different goals for what is credit for them, what is publication, what a publication should include. You know, maybe they look at different research questions than, for example, what a social scientist or a humanities researcher would be looking at. So that makes the collaboration a little bit challenging. But what they actually do, and I think both of them love, is the ICT experts, they love to develop new tools, and a lot of the social scientists, they love new tools that do exactly what they need for their research. So I think that's, in a way, that's great, but that poses the challenge of sustainability. And there are funders right now are thinking about a different way of funding, or a new, like an additional way of funding tools, ICT tools, and specifically looking at supporting the maintenance of the tools rather than just giving money to develop a new tool, which I think is quite cool.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one raised hand from the audience. Robosa, would you like to comment this topic? Please do that.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
I actually want to talk about having a platform developed for African schools, especially my country, Nigeria. We have most of the federal schools, secondary schools as well, so to say, they lack these basic ICT facilities to get good education. You know, we're still having this idea of working with the normal usual traditional classroom being dominated by most of the schools. But are there ways we can have a collaboration with SSH to help mobilize ICT tools that can help build platforms, educational platforms, educational softwares, which can enhance teaching and learning? Because I know, yes, this are mainly for publishing and all of that, but for this kind of places where we have challenges, there are some students, master students, postgraduate students, master's, PhD students that have good ideas, you know, that could develop platforms that can assist, of which when the students graduate, they can publish their own articles into journals and all of that. So are there ways SSH can collaborate with anyone having such initiative?
I had a lot of problem to hear you, to be honest.
Hello?
Hello, Arabaza, did you complete your talk?
Yeah, you get what I said.
I unfortunately, I wasn't possible to follow you because I didn't hear you well, but I hope that the other panelists.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Do you have concrete
Okay,
question or just explanation of the situation at your institution?
Okay, I was just asking if we can have a collaboration with SSH in developing a platform to assist in the individuals or schools in a place like my country or countries that are not fully developed to have ICT tools in building, teaching and learning. And as well, they can have opportunity to publish, especially for postgraduate students that are interested.
So you mean how to start to develop, let's say, the software infrastructure at your institution?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have any comment from the panelists who would like to say some words on this topic?
Well, I'm totally not an expert on this. Sorry, Daniela, I think you wanted to say something as well. I'm totally not an expert on this, so this is just an educated guess. As far as I can see and as far as I understood the question, there are a number of software platforms out there that can be used in secondary schools and primary schools and things like that. I at least know that in Germany we have these kinds of software platforms that have been programmed especially for schools, and as far as I know, they are open source. So there are a lot of things out there. The question is how they would need to be adapted for, I'll just say, the continent, for the African context. There, I don't have any experience. So I guess there are things out there which need to be adapted. And my guess would also be that there already are some software solutions from African companies themselves, but that's just a guess.
Yeah. And I agree. I think there are a variety of tools that are already being developed. Obviously, it's probably a matter of speeding some of these
the curriculum.
So I don't know if you've heard, there's this organization in the UK, it's called the CDC Group, and they especially work with EdTech and other companies in developing countries to essentially develop these type of tools. And they have a recent report actually looking at a few African countries and the online learning and how that has developed and how they've helped with some of the recent efforts. I'll put a link in to their report.
Okay.
Just one example is Moodle. If you go to moodle.org, it's an open source software that can be used to really run entire schools or universities as a platform. It's easy
Moodle?
Moodle, yes. I can post it in the chat.
Okay, I'll be glad. Thank you very much, sir. Because I was trying to develop something like that in my school. I was trying to develop a web-based instructional package during my postgraduate days of master's, and to an extent, I couldn't complete it because there were no platforms for me to get sponsorship. Okay, so I had to leave it for now and intend furthering and completing it later. And I felt the ones I read about mainly we are not dealing with us here. So I think we'll check out Moodle and see how we can integrate our curriculum into it.
Yes, I also think we should.
Thank you very much for your suggestions.
Okay, thank you very much for the question and for the responses from the panelists. I also think you should check the situation with the already developed ICT tools before you started to develop on your own something. And we have one more raised hand, but I'm afraid we are a little bit short in time. So Mariana Porta, can you briefly just comment or raise some question, but just in a minute?
Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm from Uruguay in South America, currently doing a PhD in Brazil. So it's related to my comment, which is I perceive that the social sciences have been using tools for statistic analysis for a long time, but also there are other barriers, especially in our countries in Latin America. There's language, there's funding, but also firmly established disciplinary boundaries, right? So I believe a certain attitude towards working interdisciplinary would be necessary so that certain areas get familiarized with those disciplines that are more used to working with ICT. So my question to the panel is, how do you think this particular component, academic culture, firmly established disciplinary boundaries, how can this be overcome so that a better exchange is established? Is that clear?
I think, yeah. So who would like to speak on this topic? Please.
Thank you, Mariana, for a very, very interesting question. I know of one example in Germany where it was attempted, I think it was in Aachen actually, to break down these boundaries and not have these kinds of disciplinary faculties anymore. Of course, you would still have different topics, different disciplines, but you wouldn't have this hierarchical departments and so on. That was killed pretty fast, as far as I know, because I mean, it's an in-group, out-group kind of thing from my point of view. I mean, we have the social scientists here. I guess that's something very human to keep these kinds of things. So I doubt breaking them down will work very much because the amount of specialization that we have been going on for the last hundreds of years just continues, and it's very hard to stay a generalist, which is something that we try to have here at the at our institute. But of course, it just works for very specific projects and very specific questions. And as long as you have that, and people like to put stickers on their foreheads telling everyone what they are, physicist, historian, whatever, I think that's going to stay that way. So rather than breaking down the boundaries, I think that improving, and that's something, a trend that's been happening for decades, is improving and enhancing the way people do multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary research. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mariana, thank you very much for your question, and I hope you're satisfied with the response from Miloš.
Yeah, great, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pity now that it's not a physical conference. I suppose after this session, there will be a lot of discussion at the coffee break. But we have to go further. I suggest, of course, the attendees to contact you via email or something like that if they are interested in more comments. So we are a little bit short in time. We have 3 topics more. Actually, the question is whether we can maybe tackle them all in one round. The first topic is challenges. What is the biggest challenge in the social science and humanities at the moment, which can't be resolved without ICT from your point of view? So the question is not the biggest challenge, generally speaking, in social science and humanities, but that one which can't be resolved without application of ICT. The fourth one will be also related to the challenge, but in accordance with the current situation related to the COVID-19 pandemic situation. And I also noticed there were one comment in our Q&A related to this, how the collaboration between ICT specialists and social scientists and researchers can help in resolving COVID-19 crisis. And the last one question will be about the prediction of near future. So what can happen in the next 5 to 10 years from your point of view in the meaning of the application of ICT technologies in social science and humanities? Just to see whether I can. So I'm not sure whether you can now tackle all three topics. So the first one is which one challenge can be tackled without ICT at the moment in the social science and humanities. The second one is related to the COVID-19 and collaboration between ICT sector and social science and humanities. And the third one is the future, how you can see the future in the next 5 to 10 years. So I suggest to start with Ulf this time. So Ulf, can you comment on this?
Okay, wow. Yeah, 3 big questions.
Sorry for that.
So, well, with the big challenge, I think it's a general thing that data processing, quick data processing, also dynamic data processing has become much easier or even possible at all. And this will help tackle a number of problems that we had for a long time in empirical research, in knowing, what is really happening out there in social systems over time, and also within very quick periods of time. And I think the COVID epidemic is a very good case. So you all followed the media, I guess, and you saw, how different information from different research teams, but also different media outlets, politicians, came about within a short period of time, right? And we saw research would have to be done, and it needed to be quick and with a lot of data, different data types, right? And this is all where ICTs can help. And at the same time, we were seeing the many difficulties with it, right? We talked about earlier with the communication, the division in different disciplines who think along different terms and traditions and have different tools where they don't understand each other. What tools do the others use, right? So I think this is also something for the future. And I think we already learned a lot in this epidemic that in the future, we will need to think much more about interoperability, this term API, application programming interface. How can we get systems to exchange information without misunderstandings, data loss, and so on? But also in terms of the humans involved, how do we better understand each other, learn about the different traditions in dealing with ICTs, right, within each discipline. So this is something that will happen, and I think because of the pandemic, happen more quickly, at least in some areas within the next years. And it's going to be a big challenge. And let me add one thought here. One problem is that we have a division between proprietary ICT and tools and open source. And I don't know where it's going. We will probably keep both for a while, but how do these two worlds work together? That will be a big challenge over the next years.
Okay, Ulf, thank you very much for your comment. Susan, can you now comment these 3 big topics?
Yeah, I try at least. So for the first question, I have something very simple. So yeah, it's for me the biggest challenge is to yeah, it's the impact of research. So I think where ICT can really highly contribute to social science and humanities research is by making this this research more visible and with a real impact for society. For the second question, I think it's more or less what we said for the first question. So there is a need of coordination, a better So this is we need to better coordinate, better share our knowledge, our data, and things like that. So this is where ICT-based for SSH research can contribute. So I think this is exactly indeed a good example. What I would like to point out is that of course we need this kind of coordination, especially in the field of SSH, which is for me more fragmented than for other kind of science, of disciplines. But again, and this is also something we all experiment with this crisis of COVID-19. Every day at the news, we learn something new on the virus, and we were seeing what was happening in the other country, in Europe and in the world, to see what would be the best solution to answer to this kind of crisis. And here, I think this is really highly important to keep in mind that we are talking about science and research, and we are not here to make politics or economics or things like that. So this is, of course, science is here to contribute to help public authority to take decision. This is why it's important to highlight the impact of SSH research, but it's still research, and this is why for COVID-19 nobody was aware of what should be done. And it's normal because it was totally new. So there was a kind of gap between the expectation towards researcher in medicine and people like that, and the decision of the politicians. So I think it's really important to remind to society that we are speaking about research. So it can take a bit more time than the decision which can be needed in this term in this kind of crisis. And for the last question, actually, I had prepared the same answer than Ulf about for me there is really something happening between the proprietary software and the open source software, and this is. Actually, I wrote that in another sense, maybe that so SSH research need ICT tools, but maybe as well ICT tools can be more and more influenced by the value of SSH research. I mean, in terms of openness or things like that. So it's another way to say the same thing, but this is maybe the next challenge that we can work on all together. Dragan, I think you are mute.
My apologies. Yeah, thank you very much, Suzanne, for your comments. So Daniela, can you maybe now be the next speaker who will comment on these topics?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think for the first question, I'd take a slightly different question, because what Suzanne and Ulf already said is perfect. But what I'll say is, like, what social science and humanities challenge is still not being addressed with ICT tools. And there's a very recent paper from Matt Salganik and a number of other researchers. So it's like a multi-project paper that essentially they had almost 15 years worth of data on sort of like a longitudinal data on a cohort of people in the United States. And they released part of the data and asked about 160 different teams to create predictive models on 6 indicators for life outcomes for these people. And what they found is that actually none of these 160 teams were as close to the actual outcomes of this cohort. So obviously they have the data, 15 years worth of data, so they know where these people are and what their situation is. And so what they found is that these 160 teams were closer at predicting life outcomes to each other rather than to the real life outcomes. So I think there's still a challenge, and that probably goes back to how do we use theory and ICT in order to create models that actually are better for to look and analyze behavior in society and help us in the social sciences. In terms of ICT-based research that can rise up into response to the pandemic and the economic crisis, I think the social sciences have had a real roller coaster in the past couple of months with sort of like immediate and not very immediate outcomes being taken or not taken as the research. And I partly agree with Suzanne. I think social scientists do have a role in communicating this research, and I think that, or in informing how research should be communicated in order to be understood by the wider population, applied, as well as understood by and used well by the policymakers. So there's a lot of social science research that looks at perception. So what do people see or understand when they look at graphs and or the graphs of the spread of the pandemic? Is the logarithmic graph giving them any more information or making them do a better decision? So I think that's a real role that the social sciences can have in the communication of any type of research to the wider public. Yeah, I'll plug something in here. We did put together or published an ebook, which is not yet finished because the pandemic is still ongoing. So a few social psychologists, they put together this ebook on it's called Together Apart, the psychology of the pandemic, and it's free to download, and some of it is still in draft, so obviously comments are welcome. In terms of predicting what will happen in the next 5 to 10 years, yes, I am all in terms of what is commercial and what is not. And I think really in order to be able to understand or at least think and also create the future that is coming, there are really 3 questions around, yes, where the technologies are coming from, but also where the data sits. So a lot of the data that is being currently collected around how we interact or how we spread misinformation, things like that, is commercial. So that's still also not really available to researchers. The second one is, the second question is about where are actually the brilliant minds? Are they still within academic institutions, or are they being kind of like taken away by all these big private companies? I mean, if you think about it, we've seen many academics in the computational social science, and there was even some stats on all the AI researchers. There's only one left that's still within a university. Everyone else is kind of having like this dual hat or single hat. And lastly, I think it's about who will drive a research in new methods. Who will drive this research? Is it going to come from where the funding is? A lot of it's still within commercial hands. Obviously, like all the ICT, all the like the biggest leaps in ICT are happening in the private sector, although they are starting to open up and put out some of these tools. I'm thinking specifically around text mining and all the new transformers and so on. So I think is is a range. It can be a range, but hopefully we are still optimistic that our researchers will be more on the ethical side and stay within the centers of excellence, which are universities.
Okay, Daniela, thank you very much. Very useful. And Milos, you're the last one in this round, which is the last round of this panel session, just to know.
Yes, thank you very much, Dragane. How much time do I have left? Not much. I should hurry up.
Not much, but you can say 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10
Okay.
minutes.
It's going to be hard because I think we've heard 3 very good statements on the 3 questions. So let me see if I can just add a little stuff to that. The question 1, with the biggest challenges at the moment, which can't be resolved without ICT, my first thought when I was just looking at the question was, well, getting funding opportunities seems to me to be quite impossible to do without actually writing down that you were going to use some kind of tool. At least that's my experience with the decision makers on these kinds of funding. They very often ask, well, that sounds like very interesting research, but which tool are you using? It doesn't really matter if it would make sense or not. It's just important to have one. It's sexy at the moment to do this kind of thing. So, and that's also, I think, because we are in competition with the hard sciences, so to speak. I know that that term can be problematic. So that would be the first and easy answer. What I also wanted to add, I think I rather am on the side of Daniela than on yours, Ulf. I know, Suzanne, question as to the communication to the public of research results. I agree, we are not politicians, but I do think we have some kind of responsibility as researchers, because of course it's our way of communicating that saying, hey, I found this, but this doesn't necessarily have to mean that, and it could mean this, or maybe that. That's normal science, but it's quite diametrical to what a journalist wants to hear, and that's, we found this. Period. So I do think that we need to be aware of that, and when we communicate them, I don't think it's enough to just publish things and leave them out there. The corona crisis, from my point of view, has shown that yet again. You should have seen some of the articles going around here with basic statistical questions floating around. What kind of a number do we have? What does it mean? And so on. And all the conspiracy theories that jump up around these kinds of misinterpreted questions of data. Now, I do think there is a big chance in these kinds of crises, like the one we have at the moment, specifically for the social sciences. We can do statistics on the pandemic, which we simply weren't able to do in this way a couple of decades ago. So there's lots of data out there. And I also think what's going to be very interesting now is what's going to be the effects of the countermeasures that have been taken in the different countries. And are those actually effects that can be measured and are meaningful? Which again is something that you also need to have the expert knowledge in order to be able to answer this. What do I predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years in our field in view of application of ICT technologies? I hope that the usage will be wider and wider. It will be a smart usage, so we don't just do it in order to get funded, but we do it in order to so that it actually makes sense. So I have a good tool, I have a good question, and that comes together, and that's great. But there was one final thought that came up when I was thinking about what Ulf said about the whole, that it became quicker to communicate our results. And that is and it's again a fundamental question, it's the thing with the reproduction of our results. So they need to be reproducible. And I guess that most of you are aware of some of the publications in the last years that a lot of social science and humanities results were simply not reproducible. And that's also something which is an effect of this whole infusion of ICT. So it's become a bit quicker and easier to actually try and reproduce these things. So again, here we all need, and that's a very basic final sentence from me. So we all need to stick with our fundamentals, keep everything clear, communicate our results clearly, show up limitations of our research, and hope that if others try to reproduce it, we get to similar results. Not exactly the same. I know we're not in physics, but something that's similar. Thank you very much. That's it.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Milos, for your comment. And I'm afraid that we're at the end of this panel session. It seems as it was extremely interesting to the audience for this conference, according to the number of the comments, and there are also some questions in Q&A here. But unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer all of them. We have at the moment one raised hand. Maybe we, but now it's not anymore raised. Okay. Okay, thank you very, very much for being with us today. I believe there is a lot of messages which the attendees will bring after this panel session to think about, and to think about the future in this field, let's say. After this session, we have only the closing session. So I will be back in a few minutes with the slides for a closing session. We have also to announce the winner of the Best Paper Award. Once again, thank you very, very much, all four of you, for being the part of this panel. I hope you also enjoyed the discussion. And if you have any final thoughts you would like to say just in 30 seconds, something like that, now it's the moment for that.
I would like to thank you for organizing this. It's been great. I could go on with you and you other panelists for another hour. And it's sad it's always limited, but maybe next year we'll have another conference, right? Thank you again, Dragan.
We will try to have more time next year for the discussion. As I said, it's a pity because we don't have a physical event with a coffee break and lunch break after the session, which will be used for sure for the discussion and for networking. So, but we have to use those ICT tools and virtual tools for instead of that, of course, in this COVID crisis. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm now going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll be back in a few minutes with the slides for closing session. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing.
Hvala lepo, Dragane. Doviđenja.
Doviđenja. Hvala.